For most animals, childhood is a brief preparation for independence. A few weeks, sometimes a few months, and the young are expected to stand, to move, to survive. Human beings remain dependent for more than a decade. We are born with brains still unfinished, bodies unable to walk, unable to feed themselves. In evolutionary terms, this looks inefficient, even dangerous. Natural selection rarely rewards prolonged weakness. Yet the species that spends the longest time helpless is the one that reshaped the planet. What kind of evolutionary path turns delay into advantage? In most animal species, the beginning of life moves quickly toward independence. A foal stands within hours. A calf searches for its mother's milk almost immediately. Even young primates cling tightly and begin exploring within a short span of weeks. Their bodies are shaped for early mobility because their environments demand it. Open grasslands, forests filled with predators, seasonal scarcity, these settings leave little room for prolonged weakness. Natural selection, over millions of years, tends to favor offspring who can function sooner rather than later. In that wider biological pattern, human childhood appears unusually slow. A human infant cannot walk, cannot feed itself, cannot regulate its own body temperature efficiently. For many years, it remains deeply dependent. When viewed against the backdrop of Earth's ecosystems, this is not the rule, it is the exception. To understand why, we must return to the conditions in which our species first emerged. Early members of the genus Homo lived in shifting African landscapes where climate fluctuated and resources were uneven. Survival required cooperation, mobility, and flexible strategies. A newborn who required constant protection would have been a burden unless the group itself could absorb that cost. The question, then, is not simply why human children take so long to mature, but how such a slow developmental pattern survived at all in an environment that rewarded speed and strength. Compared with many mammals of similar body size, humans extend their growth period far beyond the minimum needed for basic physical survival. Teeth erupt slowly. Bones fuse gradually. Sexual maturity arrives after more than a decade. From a purely biological standpoint, this is expensive. A long childhood increases vulnerability to disease, accidents, and environmental shocks. In evolutionary history, high infant and child mortality was common. Fossil evidence from early Homo populations suggests that many did not survive to adulthood. Every additional year of dependence multiplied risk. Yet the pattern persisted. This persistence suggests that prolonged childhood was not an accident, but part of a larger trade-off. Among our closest living relatives, such as chimpanzees, juveniles also experience extended care compared to many mammals, but even there the timeline is shorter. Human children remain learners for much longer, and their brains continue developing in complexity well into adolescence. When we compare these timelines carefully, the difference is not small. It is structural. It shapes how families organize, how groups share food, and how knowledge moves between generations. In early human camps, the presence of children who could not contribute fully to hunting or gathering would have influenced daily rhythms. Adults had to plan movements, choose campsites, and distribute labor with dependent young in mind. The environment of origin, marked by open terrain, exposure, and the need for coordinated action, did not remove weakness. Instead, it forced the group to reorganize around it. The long childhood of our species cannot be separated from the landscape of early humanity. It developed within it, shaped by it, and sustained because something about that slowness offered a return greater than its cost. When we look carefully at the natural world, early independence is not simply a convenience. It is often a requirement shaped by the environment itself. On open savannas where early humans once lived, visibility was wide but protection was limited. Grasslands offered food in certain seasons, yet they also exposed small bodies to predators. In such landscapes, many grazing mammals give birth to young who can stand within hours. Their muscles and nervous systems are prepared for immediate coordination. Delay would mean vulnerability. In forests, where cover exists but movement is three-dimensional, young primates cling tightly and begin climbing in a relatively short time. In both cases, the physical surroundings press toward early mobility. Against this environmental pattern, the human infant appears almost misplaced. A newborn cannot hold its own head steadily. cannot cling with sufficient strength for long periods, and cannot move independently across terrain. From the standpoint of habitat alone, this looks risky. Yet our species did not originate in protected, enclosed spaces. The earliest members of Homo moved across variable African ecosystems that shifted between wooded areas and more open terrain. Archaeological sites associated with early stone tools show repeated use of certain locations, suggesting coordinated group activity. These were not solitary animals surviving alone. They were members of small cooperative bands. This shift in social structure alters the equation. In a group where food is shared and vigilance is collective, the burden of a dependent infant does not rest on one body alone. The environment remains demanding, but the strategy of survival expands beyond individual speed. It becomes distributed across relationships. In this context, prolonged childhood does not disappear as a liability, but it becomes manageable. Fossil evidence also hints at this social buffering. Skeletal remains from early Homo populations show individuals who survived injuries that would have limited mobility. Healed fractures suggest care. Care requires time and coordination. If adults were capable of sustaining injured members, they were also capable of sustaining children whose growth was slow. The landscape of origin, therefore, interacts with social adaptation. The open savanna did not soften. Instead, human groups reorganized behavior within it. This reorganization created a new kind of niche, one where weakness in early life could be tolerated because collective strength compensated for it. In many species, survival depends on rapid physical competence. In early humans, survival began to depend increasingly on shared knowledge and cooperative planning. Camps were chosen with awareness of water sources, migration routes, and seasonal patterns. Such planning reduces certain environmental pressures but increases the importance of learning. A child growing up in this setting does not simply need muscles, it needs memory, observation, and imitation. The environment of origin thus does more than threaten. It teaches. It demands flexibility rather than speed alone. Prolonged childhood may appear inefficient when measured by immediate physical output, yet within a cooperative group navigating fluctuating climates, extended learning becomes part of environmental adaptation. The savanna did not reward weakness directly. It rewarded groups that could transform individual vulnerability into shared resilience. Within that transformation, the long human childhood began to find its place. If we follow this comparison further, the difference between humans and other animals is not only about how long childhood lasts, but about what fills that time. In many mammals, the early months are dedicated to mastering movement and basic feeding. Once those skills are secured, growth continues, yet the path is largely guided by instinct. A young antelope does not need years to learn migration routes in detail. It follows older members of the herd, and its body is already prepared for the terrain. A young chimpanzee requires more time than an antelope, yet much of its behavior is still anchored in patterns shared across generations with limited variation. In early human communities, however, the environment was not stable in the same way. Climate records from African sediment cores suggest repeated fluctuations over hundreds of thousands of years. Rainfall patterns shifted. Vegetation expanded and contracted. River systems changed course. Under such conditions, survival depended less on fixed instinct and more on flexible response. Stone tools from different archaeological layers show gradual modification in shape and technique. These changes were not random. They reflect accumulated adjustments to changing surroundings. For such accumulation to persist, knowledge had to be transmitted with precision. A child born into a small band of foragers did not inherit survival entirely through genetic coding. It inherited a cultural system that required observation, imitation, correction, and practice. This process cannot be rushed. Learning how to shape a stone core, how to identify edible plants among similar-looking toxic ones, or how to interpret animal tracks on dry soil involves subtle distinctions. Errors could be costly. Extended childhood created a protected period in which mistakes were less likely to carry fatal consequences because adults buffered the risk. The group structure absorbed the cost of experimentation. From a biological perspective, this extended phase of learning correlates with the prolonged development of the human brain. neural connections continue forming and reorganizing long after birth. Compared to other primates, humans experience a particularly extended period of synaptic growth followed by gradual pruning. This neurological timeline aligns with a childhood that stretches across many years. The environment of origin, marked by variability and the need for innovation, favored brains capable of ongoing adaptation. Yet such brains require time to mature. In this sense, the slowness of human childhood is tied to a broader evolutionary trade-off: less immediate physical independence in exchange for expanded cognitive plasticity. Early Homo groups navigating open landscapes, shifting climates, and shared responsibilities created conditions in which extended learning was not a weakness but a preparation. The comparison with other animals therefore reveals not only difference in duration but difference in strategy. Where many species compress development to meet immediate environmental demands, humans lengthen development to manage long-term uncertainty. The savanna and woodland mosaics of early Africa did not eliminate danger, but they favored groups that could remember, teach, and adjust. Within that long arc of adaptation, childhood became a structured interval of learning rather than a brief bridge to survival. When we move from comparison to anatomy, another layer of the story begins to appear. Human childhood did not lengthen in isolation. It unfolded alongside a change in posture that reshaped the entire body. Several million years ago, our distant ancestors began walking upright more consistently. Fossil evidence from species such as Australopithecus shows adaptations in the pelvis and lower limbs that indicate habitual bipedalism. Standing and moving on two legs altered how energy was used, how distance was covered, and how the body balanced weight. It also altered the birth canal. The human pelvis became shorter and broader to support internal organs during upright walking, yet it also had to remain narrow enough for efficient locomotion. This dual demand created a structural tension. As brain size gradually increased within the genus Homo, the skull of the newborn also became larger. A wider head passing through a birth canal shaped for upright walking produced a biological compromise. Infants could not remain in the womb until full neurological maturity because their head size would exceed what the pelvis could safely accommodate. As a result, human babies are born at a comparatively earlier stage of development than many other mammals of similar size. Some researchers describe human newborns as neurologically premature relative to what might be expected if gestation continued longer. This early birth shifts developmental time outward into the social world. Instead of completing much of brain growth before birth, humans continue it after birth. The cost of this compromise is visible in the fragility of the infant. Limited motor control, extended dependence on caregivers, and vulnerability to environmental stress are direct consequences. Yet this structural compromise also opened a pathway. Postnatal brain growth occurs within a rich sensory and social environment. Neural connections form in response to language, touch, sound, and shared attention. In the evolutionary landscapes of early Homo, where small groups coordinated movement and food sharing, this externalized development allowed the brain to be shaped by lived experience from the beginning. The shift to upright walking, therefore, did more than free the hands. It reshaped reproductive timing. Fossil pelvises from early Homo suggest that the constraints of bipedal locomotion persisted even as brain size expanded. This means that prolonged childhood is partly rooted in a mechanical trade-off embedded in our skeleton. The upright posture that allowed tool carrying and long-distance travel also imposed limits on gestation length. Childhood became longer not simply because learning was valuable, but because birth had to occur earlier. The anatomical compromise between locomotion and childbirth created a starting point for extended dependence. Within the ecological context of early human life, where cooperation already buffered vulnerability, this compromise did not collapse the population. Instead, it became integrated into group survival strategies. The body's structure, shaped by walking upright across open terrain, set the stage for a developmental timeline that stretched beyond infancy. In this way, the length of human childhood is tied directly to the moment our ancestors stood and began moving differently across the African landscape. The anatomical compromise created by upright walking did not end at birth. It extended into the rhythm of growth that followed. When an infant is born at an earlier stage of neurological development, much of the work that other mammals complete inside the womb must now unfold in open air. The human skull remains partially flexible, with sutures that allow the brain to expand rapidly in the first years of life. This rapid expansion is not random. It follows a pattern shaped by millions of years of adaptation to upright posture and increasing brain volume. In early Homo populations, brain size expanded gradually over evolutionary time. Fossils of Homo erectus show cranial capacities larger than earlier Australopithecines, yet still smaller than modern humans. Each increase in cranial volume intensified the tension between locomotion and childbirth. The pelvis could not widen indefinitely without compromising walking efficiency. The solution was not a single event, but a continuing balance. Infants born with brains still growing, and caregivers absorbing the cost of prolonged immaturity. This pattern created a developmental arc that stretched beyond infancy into childhood. The brain of a young child consumes a remarkably high proportion of total energy compared to body size. In early human environments, where food acquisition required planning and cooperation, this energetic demand meant that adults had to secure sufficient calories not only for themselves but also for offspring whose brains were rapidly developing. The environment of origin, characterized by fluctuating resources, would have made this task difficult. Yet archaeological evidence of repeated occupation sites suggests that early humans developed strategies to stabilize food supply, such as coordinated hunting and the use of fire. Fire, appearing reliably in later Homo erectus and subsequent species, altered digestion and caloric extraction. Cooked food provides more accessible energy, potentially supporting larger brains and extended growth periods. In this way, the anatomical constraint of the pelvis interacted with technological and social innovation. Walking upright constrained gestation length. Technological adaptation helped offset the energetic cost of prolonged postnatal brain growth. The child's slow development, therefore, is not simply a byproduct of skeletal limitation. It is intertwined with ecological adaptation. As early humans moved across open landscapes, carrying tools and sharing food, the upright body allowed distance and coordination. That same body required earlier birth. Earlier birth, extended dependence. Extended dependence required reliable cooperation. Over generations, this cycle reinforced itself. The structural compromise became embedded in population dynamics. Fossil records show that juvenile remains are present in multiple sites, indicating that groups regularly included dependent young. Survival was not based on producing offspring, who could run immediately. It was based on sustaining offspring whose growth continued under the watch of the group. The tension between pelvis and brain did not weaken human potential. It redirected developmental time outward into social space. In the African environments where this balance first emerged, upright walking was not an isolated trait. It was part of a network of adaptations that collectively shaped the long arc of human childhood. The structural tension between upright walking and childbirth did more than shape infancy. It influenced the entire pace of human maturation. When birth occurs at a relatively early stage of neurological development, the timeline of growth must stretch outward. The skeleton of a human child remains unfinished for many years. Long bones lengthen gradually, joints stabilize over time, and the pelvis itself continues reshaping through adolescence. Compared to many mammals of similar body mass, humans reach physical maturity slowly. This extended arc is visible in dental evidence. Fossilized teeth from early Homo individuals show patterns of eruption that differ from those of apes. Teeth do not emerge all at once. Instead, they follow a prolonged schedule, reflecting a slower life history pattern. Life history theory and biology examines how organisms allocate energy between growth, maintenance, and reproduction. In this framework, humans occupy an unusual position. We delay full physical maturity and reproduction longer than most primates. The origin of this delay can be traced back to the same anatomical compromise created by bipedalism and expanding brain size. An early birth means that much developmental work must occur under social protection. As brain growth continues, the body must supply energy steadily across years. This steady supply requires predictable cooperation within the group. In the fluctuating environments of Pleistocene Africa, predictability was never guaranteed. Climate shifts altered rainfall and vegetation. Animal herds migrated along changing routes. In such conditions, groups that could coordinate food sharing and childcare would have been more resilient. The upright body, designed for endurance walking across open terrain, allowed adults to travel longer distances in search of resources. That mobility helped offset environmental instability. Yet mobility alone did not eliminate vulnerability. A child dependent for many years required consistent attention. The fossil record, though fragmentary, reveals repeated evidence of juveniles within habitation sites, indicating that dependent young were a normal part of group life rather than rare exceptions. The slow pace of skeletal maturation suggests that childhood was not merely extended by accident, it became embedded in the species' life history. Even the timing of adolescence reflects this pattern. Humans experience a distinct growth spurt during puberty, unlike most other primates. This secondary surge in development may relate to the demands of a complex social environment where individuals must acquire skills before entering full reproductive roles. The roots of that delay lie in the anatomical compromise of early birth. Upright walking narrowed the path of gestation. Expanded brains required more growth. Prolonged childhood became the bridge connecting those constraints. In the landscapes where early humans moved between woodland and grassland, carrying tools and knowledge, the body's structure set a tempo that could not be hurried. Over generations, this tempo shaped population structure, with overlapping cohorts of children, adolescents, and adults. The tension between pelvis and brain thus echoed far beyond the moment of birth. It influenced the rhythm of human life itself, stretching development across a span that no other species of similar size sustains in quite the same way. If early birth shifted much of development outside the womb, then the human brain became the central organ shaping the length of childhood. Compared to other primates, the human brain grows for a longer period and reaches a larger size relative to body weight. This growth is not limited to an increase in volume. It involves the formation of connections between neurons, the strengthening of some pathways, and the gradual elimination of others. In newborn humans, many neural circuits are not yet fully organized. Sensory systems begin functioning quickly, yet higher processes such as language, long-term planning, and abstract reasoning require years to mature. Fossil skulls from early members of the genus Homo reveal a steady enlargement of cranial capacity over time. Homo habilis shows a modest increase over Australopithecines. Homo erectus displays a further expansion. By the time anatomically modern humans appear, cranial capacity reaches levels comparable to those of today. Each increment in brain size increased potential for flexible behavior, but it also increased developmental demands. A larger brain requires more energy and more time to organize its internal networks. The earliest stone tools associated with older one technology already suggest planning beyond immediate instinct. Shaping a stone core to produce a sharp edge requires understanding fracture patterns and anticipating outcomes. These skills are not innate in the same way as a reflex. They must be learned. The archaeological record shows gradual refinement from simple flakes to more symmetrical hand axes in later Acheulean industries. This progression indicates that knowledge accumulated and was transmitted across generations. A child born into such a cultural environment needed time to observe and practice. The brain's extended plasticity made this possible. Plasticity refers to the ability of neural circuits to reorganize in response to experience. In humans, plasticity remains high during early childhood and declines gradually over adolescence. This prolonged window allows the environment to shape cognition in detail. In the fluctuating climates of Pleistocene Africa, where habitats alternated between wetter and drier phases, flexibility was valuable. Groups that could adapt tools, migration routes, and social strategies to shifting conditions would have had a survival advantage. The slow maturation of the human brain therefore aligns with ecological uncertainty. Instead of producing offspring whose behavior was largely fixed at birth, evolution favored individuals whose brains could adjust through learning. Yet this adjustment required protection during its most vulnerable stages. A brain that is still wiring itself cannot also manage complex survival tasks alone. Thus, the extended neurological development reinforced the need for long-term care. The length of childhood is inseparable from the brain's growth trajectory. Early birth, constrained by the upright pelvis, placed brain development into the social environment. That environment, shaped by changing landscapes and cooperative living, provided the stimuli that guided neural organization. Over time, the expanding brain and the extended childhood formed a feedback loop. More complex cognition required longer learning. Longer learning favored brains capable of sustaining plasticity. In this way, the biological structure of the human brain became both a cause and a consequence of prolonged childhood, rooted in the evolutionary pathway that began when our ancestors walked upright across open terrain. The growth of the human brain after birth is not simply a matter of becoming larger. It is a matter of becoming organized through experience. In the first years of life, neural connections multiply at a rapid rate. Synapses form in response to sensory input, movement, sound, touch, and especially social interaction. Studies of modern human development show that infants are highly responsive to faces and voices from the beginning. This responsiveness suggests that the brain is prepared for social learning, yet the detailed structure of language and complex behavior must still be built gradually. In early human environments, this building process unfolded within small groups where daily life required cooperation. The archaeological record provides indirect evidence of this complexity. Hearth sites, repeated tool-making areas, and signs of shared food processing indicate coordinated activity. A child growing up near such activities would not immediately participate as an equal contributor. Instead, it would observe patterns, how adults shaped tools, how they divided meat, how they responded to changes in weather or animal movement. The brain's extended plasticity allowed these observations to leave lasting traces in neural circuits. Compared to chimpanzees, whose brains also grow for several years after birth, humans exhibit a particularly prolonged period of cortical development. The prefrontal cortex, associated with planning and impulse control, matures slowly, often extending into adolescence. This delayed maturation means that young humans are less capable of independent decision-making early on, yet it also allows more time for social norms and cultural rules to become embedded. In fluctuating African landscapes, where rainfall and vegetation patterns shifted across generations, rigid behavioral programming could be a disadvantage. A flexible brain, capable of adjusting to new tool types or migration routes, would better match environmental variability. The cost of this flexibility is time. During this extended developmental window, children depend on adults not only for food, but for structured guidance. The environment of origin therefore shaped the pace of neural maturation indirectly. It favored brains that remained open to modification. Fossil evidence cannot preserve neural tissue, yet cranial endocasts show changes in brain shape over evolutionary time, suggesting reorganization of cortical regions. Such reorganization likely corresponded with increasing reliance on learning. The extended childhood that accompanies this neural trajectory is not uniform across all aspects of growth. Some sensory and motor skills develop early, enabling basic interaction with surroundings, yet higher-order reasoning and complex communication emerge slowly. This layered development mirrors the layered demands of early human life. Physical survival required immediate care. Long-term survival required knowledge accumulation. The brain's slow wiring process created the space for that accumulation. The anatomical compromise of early birth placed the unfinished brain into a social world rich with stimuli. The ecological instability of Pleistocene Africa ensured that those stimuli varied across time and place. Within this interaction between body, brain, and landscape, prolonged childhood became a structural feature of human life rather than a temporary delay. If the human brain requires many years to organize itself, then childhood becomes the interval in which this organization is carefully shaped. The process is gradual. During early life, neural connections expand rapidly, but they are not all retained. As experience accumulates, some pathways strengthen while others are reduced. This selective pruning increases efficiency, yet it depends on repeated exposure to meaningful patterns. In the environments where early humans lived, those patterns were not limited to physical movement. They included tool sequences, cooperative hunting roles, recognition of seasonal changes, and subtle social cues within the group. A brain that remained flexible for longer could integrate these layers more precisely. Evidence from modern developmental studies shows that human children learn through imitation and shared attention. When adults focus on an object or action, children follow their gaze and reproduce gestures. This capacity for joint attention appears early but requires sustained interaction to mature. In small foraging bands of the Pleistocene, where survival relied on coordinated effort, such social learning would have been essential. A child observing stone flaking or food preparation would gradually internalize sequences that cannot be reduced to instinct alone. The archaeological record, though silent about individual lessons, reveals continuity in tool forms across generations. Acheulean hand axes maintain recognizable symmetry for hundreds of thousands of years, implying stable transmission. Stability of form suggests stable teaching. Teaching, in turn, requires time. The slow maturation of the prefrontal cortex means that impulse control and long-term planning develop late. In evolutionary terms, this delay may have allowed extended periods for absorbing social norms before assuming full adult responsibilities. Within fluctuating African climates, where cooperation buffered environmental risk, maintaining group cohesion was as important as acquiring physical skills. Emotional regulation and trust could not be compressed into a few months. They unfolded over years of shared experience. The brain's prolonged development therefore intertwines with social structure. It also aligns with demographic patterns. Fossil assemblages show individuals of varying ages within habitation sites, indicating overlapping generations. A long developmental phase means that adolescents remain within the group before reproducing. This delay extends learning even further, creating a bridge between childhood and adulthood that is unique among primates. The upright posture that once constrained gestation had already placed early brain growth outside the womb. Now, extended neural plasticity prolonged that process across an entire childhood. The landscapes of origin did not simplify. Rainfall cycles, shifting vegetation, and migratory animals continued to challenge human groups. A brain that remained adaptable for many years offered a response to that uncertainty. Yet such adaptability required protection, guidance, and shared resources. In this interaction between anatomical constraint and neural expansion, the length of human childhood becomes clearer. It is not only about birth timing, it is about the sustained shaping of a brain designed to learn from a complex and changing world. If the brain is the central organ that stretches childhood, then energy is the quiet force that makes that stretching possible. A growing human brain consumes a remarkable share of the body's total calories. In early childhood, the brain can use more than half of the body's resting energy expenditure. This proportion is far higher than in most other mammals. Such a demand is not trivial. In the environments where early humans lived, calories were not guaranteed. Food had to be located, gathered, hunted, processed, and shared. Energy, therefore, became a limiting factor that shaped how long development could unfold. Fossil and archaeological evidence from early Homo sites suggests coordinated subsistence strategies. Stone tools found near animal bones indicate organized butchery. Repeated occupation layers at certain locations imply planned return to reliable resource areas. These patterns reflect more than opportunistic feeding. They show emerging systems of energy management within groups. When a child's brain requires sustained caloric input over many years, adults must secure a surplus beyond their own needs. This surplus cannot be produced by one individual alone in a fluctuating Pleistocene climate. It requires division of labor and cooperation. The upright body, adapted for endurance walking, allowed adults to travel greater distances to find food. Long-distance movement could expand the radius of resource access, especially in open savanna mosaics. Yet travel also increases risk and energy expenditure. The balance between gain and cost becomes delicate. Fire, once controlled reliably, altered this balance. Cooked food increases caloric availability and reduces the digestive effort required to extract nutrients. Archaeological traces of hearths associated with later Homo species suggest that cooking may have supported both larger brains and extended growth periods. A child whose brain is wiring itself cannot forage effectively for many years. During that interval, Caregivers must buffer environmental shocks such as drought or scarcity. This buffering links energy to social structure. In small foraging bands, food sharing reduces variability in individual intake. Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherers show that meat and gathered foods are distributed within the group rather than monopolized by the individual who acquired them. While modern groups are not direct replicas of ancient ones, such patterns provide insight into how extended dependence could be sustained. The energetic cost of prolonged childhood thus reshapes daily life. Adults must allocate time not only to immediate survival but to provisioning those who are not yet productive. In evolutionary terms, this allocation is justified only if the long-term return outweighs the short-term cost. A slowly developing brain capable of learning complex subsistence strategies may provide that return. In the shifting landscapes of early Africa, where rainfall cycles altered plant growth and animal migration, flexibility increased survival probability. Energy invested in a long childhood therefore became an investment in adaptability. The upright skeleton constrained gestation, the expanding brain demanded fuel, and cooperative food acquisition provided the means. Within this network of trade-offs, energy emerges as the silent architect of prolonged human development. Energy is never distributed evenly in nature. In the Pleistocene landscapes where early humans lived, rainfall varied across decades, and plant productivity shifted with climate cycles. Animal herds followed water and vegetation. Some seasons offered abundance, others narrowed possibilities. Within such variability, the energetic cost of raising a slow-developing child would have been exposed to constant pressure. A brain that consumes a large share of calories during early life cannot pause its growth when food becomes scarce. Neural tissue is metabolically active. It demands steady fuel. This demand means that the survival of children depended not only on daily success, but on the stability of social systems that could absorb temporary shortages. Archaeological sites associated with early Homo show repeated occupation near water sources and raw material outcrops. These patterns suggest planning and knowledge of landscape cycles. Knowledge reduces risk by allowing groups to anticipate seasonal change. Yet anticipation requires memory and shared communication. The energy invested in a child's brain therefore returns as improved environmental prediction in later years. This delayed return may explain why extended childhood persisted despite its cost. The group that supports long-term brain development gains individuals capable of refined tool use, spatial mapping, and cooperative coordination. Such skills increase hunting efficiency and plant processing success. In this way, energy investment is redistributed across time. The upright posture that once reshaped childbirth also facilitated energy acquisition. Endurance walking allows access to distant carcasses and scattered plant resources. Paleoanthropological research suggests that Homo erectus possessed anatomical traits consistent with long-distance travel, including elongated lower limbs and narrower hips relative to earlier hominins. These features would have supported movement across open terrain in search of food. Mobility expands opportunity but does not eliminate uncertainty. Children, unable to travel efficiently, rely on adults to manage distance and transport. Carrying dependent young imposes additional energetic load. Fossil evidence of healed injuries in early Homo individuals implies that groups already shared burdens, including care for vulnerable members. This shared burden extends to children whose caloric needs exceed their productive output for many years. Energy, therefore, becomes a collective resource rather than a purely individual one. Ethnographic studies of contemporary hunter-gatherers, though separated by vast stretches of time, illustrate similar patterns of food sharing and cooperative childcare. While we cannot assume identical structures in the deep past, the principle of shared provisioning aligns with the demands imposed by a long childhood. In fluctuating African ecosystems, cooperation stabilizes intake across individuals. The brain's prolonged growth depends on this stabilization. If energy distribution collapsed under environmental stress, extended childhood would become untenable. Its persistence suggests that early human groups maintained sufficient cooperation to buffer variability. Thus, energy is not merely a biological constraint. It is a force shaping social bonds and demographic patterns. The cost of fueling a large, slowly maturing brain reconfigured how humans related to one another and to the landscape. Energy invested in childhood does not disappear. It changes form across time. In early human communities, the calories directed toward a dependent child's brain growth were stored not in muscle mass or immediate labor output, but in future competence. This shift in temporal focus distinguishes human development from that of many other mammals. A young gazelle must run soon after birth because its survival depends on immediate speed. A human child cannot contribute meaningfully to hunting or gathering for many years. Instead, the investment is deferred. Life history theory describes this as a slow strategy, where growth and learning are prolonged before reproduction begins. Fossil and archaeological evidence indicates that such a slow strategy characterized the genus Homo. Tooth enamel growth lines from fossil juveniles suggest extended developmental periods compared to earlier hominins. These microscopic traces provide insight into growth rates, revealing that childhood was not only long in modern humans, but was gradually lengthening across evolutionary time. The energetic burden of this strategy required stability within the group. In the shifting climates of the Pleistocene, stability could not rely on environmental constancy. It had to be generated socially. Cooperative hunting, food sharing, and possibly division of labor between sexes created a buffer against fluctuations. Some anthropological models propose that hunting larger game, though risky, yields high caloric returns that can be distributed widely within a band. When successful, such returns offset periods of scarcity. The control of fire may have amplified this effect by increasing digestibility and caloric extraction from both meat and plant foods. Cooking reduces chewing time and enhances nutrient availability, indirectly supporting larger brains and longer growth periods. The upright body, adapted for endurance and carrying, enabled transport of both food and dependent children across landscapes. This physical capacity, combined with shared provisioning, allowed groups to maintain offspring who required years of energetic input before contributing. The return on this prolonged investment appears in cumulative culture. Archaeological sequences show incremental refinement in tool design and settlement patterns. Such refinement suggests learning that extends beyond basic survival. A child who grows slowly within this system has time to internalize not only techniques but also social expectations. Delayed maturation means that adolescents remain integrated within adult networks longer before forming independent families. This delay influences population structure, spacing births over time and allowing overlapping generations to coexist. Grandparents, if present, contribute knowledge and possibly food to younger cohorts, further stabilizing the energetic network. In ecological terms, this strategy transforms vulnerability into long-term resilience. Instead of maximizing early independence, early humans maximized learning capacity supported by collective energy management. The landscape of origin, characterized by unpredictability, favored groups capable of spreading energetic cost across many individuals and many years. Within that distribution, prolonged childhood ceased to be an anomaly. It became a cornerstone of how humans organize survival across time. If childhood extends for many years, then the responsibility of sustaining it cannot rest on parents alone. In most mammals, care is concentrated in the mother, and once offspring reach a certain stage, independence follows quickly. In humans, dependence overlaps across siblings and stretches across a decade or more. This overlap alters the structure of generations. Fossil evidence suggests that members of later Homo species, including Neanderthals and early modern humans, sometimes survived into what we would consider older adulthood. Skeletal remains with advanced tooth wear and signs of aging indicate that individuals lived beyond the years of peak physical strength. The presence of older adults within small foraging bands changes how energy and knowledge circulate. When multiple generations coexist, the task of raising children can be distributed more broadly. The concept sometimes referred to as cooperative breeding describes a system in which individuals other than the biological parents contribute to childcare. In humans, this may include grandparents, older siblings, and other group members. While direct fossil evidence of childcare roles is limited, demographic modeling and comparisons with living hunter-gatherer societies suggest that shared caregiving increases offspring survival. In fluctuating Pleistocene environments, where food availability varied and mortality risk was significant, distributing the burden of care would have stabilized group resilience. The long childhood of humans therefore aligns with a generational structure that differs from that of many primates. Among chimpanzees, for example, juveniles receive extended maternal care, but grandparental involvement is less pronounced. In humans, menopause occurs well before the end of life, creating a span during which older females no longer reproduce but remain active within the group. Some evolutionary hypotheses propose that this pattern, sometimes called the grandmother hypothesis, may have supported extended childhood by increasing available caregivers. If older individuals contributed food gathering, especially of reliable plant resources, they could offset the energetic cost of dependent grandchildren. The African landscapes where early humans evolved demanded mobility and foresight. Older adults, carrying accumulated knowledge of migration routes and seasonal cycles, could guide group decisions. Knowledge, like energy, becomes a shared resource. A child growing within a multi-generational band absorbs not only immediate parental instruction, but also the experience of elders. Archaeological continuity in tool forms across long periods implies stable transmission channels. Stability across generations requires presence of teachers who remember previous techniques. Extended childhood allows time to receive such instruction. The coexistence of elders and children within the same campsites creates a feedback loop. Older adults support child survival. Children extend the cultural line forward. In this arrangement, prolonged dependence is buffered by demographic design. The upright body that once constrained childbirth and the expanding brain that required sustained energy now intersect with population structure. Overlapping generations provide the social scaffolding necessary to sustain long development. Within the shifting ecologies of early Africa, where survival required both strength and memory, this scaffolding transformed vulnerability into continuity. When generations overlap for extended periods, time itself becomes a resource. In early human bands, the coexistence of children, adults in their prime, and older individuals created a layered structure of memory and labor. Fossil assemblages from sites attributed to Neanderthals and early modern humans contain skeletal remains of individuals who reached advanced ages relative to the average life expectancy of their era. While many did not survive childhood, those who did sometimes lived long enough to accumulate decades of experience. This uneven distribution of survival produced small groups where a few elders carried a large portion of remembered knowledge. In fluctuating African and Eurasian environments, such memory could guide decisions about migration routes, water sources, and seasonal food availability. A child raised in this setting grows within a network that extends beyond immediate parents. Older siblings may assist in carrying, watching, or feeding younger ones. Anthropological studies of recent foraging societies suggest that juvenile helpers contribute meaningfully to childcare long before reaching full adulthood. Although modern groups cannot be treated as direct replicas of ancient ones, they provide insight into how cooperative systems may function under subsistence conditions. Shared caregiving reduces the energetic strain on any single adult and stabilizes child survival across variable seasons. The presence of older adults who are no longer reproducing adds another layer. Human females typically experience menopause decades before death, a pattern rare among mammals. This biological feature increases the ratio of non-reproductive adults to dependent children within a group. Some evolutionary models argue that post-reproductive individuals may enhance the survival of grandchildren by contributing food and knowledge. In environments marked by periodic scarcity, gathering reliable plant foods or monitoring known resource patches could buffer younger adults who focus on hunting or travel. A prolonged childhood thus aligns with a demographic pattern where older individuals remain active participants in daily life. The upright body that once shaped childbirth constraints also shaped mobility patterns across generations. Elders capable of walking moderate distances could accompany groups and maintain cohesion. Even when mobility decreased, their knowledge remained portable through language and teaching. Archaeological continuity in tool forms and settlement use across millennia implies stable channels of transmission. Stability requires time. A child does not absorb complex subsistence strategies in a brief interval. It requires years of observation and gradual participation. The overlapping of generations extends this window. Children learn from parents and from elders who recall different climatic phases. In Pleistocene Africa, where rainfall cycles could shift habitats over centuries, such intergenerational continuity provided resilience. Demographic layering therefore interacts with energy management and brain development. The long childhood of humans becomes sustainable, not because individuals are strong alone, but because the group distributes care across age classes. Within this arrangement, dependence is shared, and knowledge accumulates slowly yet persistently across time. When several generations live side by side, the meaning of childhood changes. It is no longer only a private stage between a mother and her infant. It becomes a shared interval shaped by the rhythm of the group. In small foraging communities of the late Pleistocene, camps would have included individuals at many different life stages. Newborns carried close to the body, toddlers exploring within sight of adults, adolescents gradually joining food-gathering tasks, and elders whose physical strength may have declined, but whose experience remained valuable. This demographic layering creates continuity across time. Archaeological sites that show repeated occupation over generations indicate that certain places were remembered and revisited. Memory of landscape is not stored in stone alone, it is carried in people. A child growing up in such a band does not learn in isolation. It observes interactions between age groups. It sees how older individuals respond to changes in weather or animal movement. It listens to stories that encode information about past scarcity or successful hunts. Even if the details of those stories cannot be recovered archaeologically, the persistence of cultural traditions in tool forms and site usage suggests stable transmission across generations. The presence of elders who are no longer reproducing extends the chain of instruction backward. This extension allows knowledge to accumulate rather than reset with each birth cohort. The long childhood of humans provides time to absorb that accumulation. In species where life expectancy is short and generations overlap minimally, learning must be compressed. In humans, overlapping generations create a buffer. Adolescents remain within the group for years before establishing independent households. This delay shapes social bonds. It fosters familiarity with group norms and cooperative expectations. In fluctuating African environments, where rainfall cycles altered plant growth and animal migrations over decades, such continuity would have enhanced resilience. Groups that remembered previous dry periods or alternative resource zones could adjust more effectively. Childhood thus becomes a bridge between environmental memory and future adaptation. The upright body, adapted for endurance travel, enabled elders and adults alike to move across landscapes while maintaining group cohesion. Even when mobility declined with age, knowledge remained mobile through speech and demonstration. The extended brain development discussed earlier finds its social context here. Neural plasticity requires input. Multiple generations provide varied input. Energy invested in a child's long growth returns, not only as individual competence but as preservation of collective knowledge. The demographic structure of early Homo bands therefore acted as scaffolding around prolonged childhood. Dependence did not weaken the group if responsibility was distributed. Instead, it created a layered society in which children matured within a continuum of remembered experience. In this way, extended childhood aligns with the persistence of cultural memory across time and terrain. If childhood extends across many years, it creates not only time for brain growth and energy investment, but also a prolonged period for absorbing culture. Culture, in this context, does not mean art or ceremony alone. It refers to the accumulated practices that allow a group to survive in a particular environment. In early human societies, culture included how to select stones suitable for tool making, how to recognize edible tubers among similar-looking plants, how to interpret subtle animal tracks in dry soil, and how to respond to shifts in wind or cloud patterns that signaled coming rain. None of these skills are fully encoded at birth. They are acquired slowly through observation and guided participation. The archaeological record provides indirect evidence of cultural layering. Acheulean hand axes, for example, show remarkable consistency in form across wide geographic regions and long stretches of time. Such consistency implies shared standards of shape and function. A child learning to produce these tools would need repeated exposure and correction. Stone flaking is not instinctive in its refined form. It requires understanding force angles, core preparation, and sequence. These are procedural memories that develop through practice over years. In fluctuating Pleistocene landscapes, where habitats alternated between wetter and drier phases, subsistence strategies had to adjust. Groups might shift from relying more heavily on plant gathering to emphasizing hunting depending on seasonal conditions. Cultural knowledge provided flexibility within this variability. A long childhood allows gradual entry into these shifting roles. Young children might begin with simple gathering tasks near camp, while adolescents accompany adults on longer forays. This graded participation reduces risk while expanding competence. The upright body that once constrained gestation also freed the hands for carrying tools and food. That anatomical change made material culture central to survival. Once tools became essential, the time required to learn them expanded childhood further. Unlike a reflex such as grasping, tool sequences are not triggered automatically. They are transmitted. Transmission depends on attention and repetition. Extended neural plasticity, discussed earlier, provides the biological substrate for this learning. Yet plasticity alone is insufficient without sustained exposure. The demographic structure of overlapping generations ensures that exposure persists across years. In early African environments marked by climatic instability, cultural accumulation offered a buffer against unpredictability. A child raised within such a system does not simply mature physically, it inherits a map of strategies tested over generations. The length of childhood thus aligns with the length of cultural memory. Instead of producing offspring quickly ready to reproduce, human evolution favored individuals who spent years internalizing shared techniques and norms. In this way, prolonged childhood becomes the training ground for cumulative culture, rooted in the ecological pressures and anatomical shifts that shape the earliest members of our species. In a world shaped by stone, fire, and shifting seasons, learning could not be compressed into a few months. Cultural knowledge in early human societies was layered, and each layer required time. A child did not simply memorize techniques, it absorbed patterns of behavior embedded in daily routines. Consider the production of stone tools. Archaeological analysis of Oldowan and later Acheulean assemblages shows that tool-making involved multiple steps: selecting suitable raw material, striking at controlled angles, shaping edges, and discarding flawed pieces. Experimental archaeology demonstrates that even modern adults require extended practice to reproduce these sequences accurately. For a child growing within a small band tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, this learning would unfold gradually. It would begin with watching, then handling discarded flakes, then attempting simple strikes under supervision. Mistakes would be common, yet within the protective circle of the group, those mistakes could be corrected without immediate danger. This slow apprenticeship aligns with extended childhood. Cultural transmission extended beyond tools. Knowledge of edible plants required attention to subtle variation. Many wild plants resemble one another, yet differ sharply in nutritional value or toxicity. Ethnobotanical studies of contemporary foragers reveal detailed taxonomies encoded in language and practice. Although we cannot reconstruct the full vocabulary of early Homo, the persistence of site occupation in specific ecological zones implies stable knowledge of local resources. A child raised in a Pleistocene environment would need to learn seasonal cycles, when certain tubers become available, when fruits ripen, when animal migrations pass through predictable corridors. Such cycles are not static, they respond to rainfall and temperature shifts. Paleoclimate records from African lake sediments indicate repeated oscillations between wetter and drier periods. In such fluctuating conditions, rigid instinct would not suffice. Cultural memory allowed adaptation, and extended childhood provided the interval necessary to internalize that memory. Fire further deepened cultural complexity. Control of fire, documented reliably in later Homo species, transformed daily life. Hearths created focal points for food processing and social interaction. Cooking altered texture and digestibility, but it also required timing and judgment. Food could burn or remain undercooked. Children observing these processes would gradually learn appropriate durations and techniques. The hearth likely served as a place of storytelling and instruction, reinforcing shared norms. A long childhood ensured repeated exposure to these patterned interactions. The upright posture that once reshaped childbirth also reconfigured social space. Freed hands carried tools and gathered resources, increasing reliance on material culture. Once survival depended on objects crafted intentionally, the time needed to master their use expanded. Extended neural plasticity provided biological capacity for learning, yet culture supplied the content. The demographic layering of early human groups ensured continuity of instruction across generations. Adolescents remained within the group long enough to move from observation to participation to teaching younger members. In this way, prolonged childhood aligns not only with brain growth and energy management, but with the demands of cumulative culture. The environment of origin, marked by ecological variability, required flexible strategies preserved and refined over time. Childhood became the slow bridge through which that refinement traveled from one generation to the next. Cultural knowledge does not move automatically from one generation to the next. It must be demonstrated, repeated, and corrected. This process requires stability over time. In early human societies, the continuity visible in archaeological records, whether in tool forms, site selection, or patterns of butchery, suggests that learning was structured rather than accidental. Structured learning takes years. A child observing adults shape stone tools would not immediately understand why certain strikes succeed and others fail. The angle of impact, the quality of the raw material, and the sequence of removal all matter. These details are subtle. Experimental studies show that mastery of even simple lithic techniques demands prolonged guided practice. Extended childhood creates the time needed for gradual internalization of such procedural knowledge. Beyond tools, cultural systems include social expectations. Cooperation in hunting or gathering requires coordination and trust. Trust develops slowly through repeated interaction. In small Pleistocene bands navigating African savannas and woodland mosaics, coordinated effort reduced risk. Hunting large game, if practiced, demanded shared timing and mutual awareness. Gathering plant foods required memory of locations and seasons. These coordinated behaviors rely on social rules: who participates, who receives portions, how conflict is resolved. A child raised in this environment absorbs not only techniques but norms. Norms cannot be installed instantly. They emerge from observing disputes, witnessing reconciliation, and learning boundaries over many years. The upright body that once constrained gestation now plays another role. It shapes how individuals move together across landscapes. Endurance walking across open terrain requires pacing and cooperation. Younger members cannot travel as far or as quickly as adults. Groups adjust speed to include them. This adjustment alters daily rhythms and reinforces interdependence. Children gradually extend their range, accompanying adults on longer forays as competence increases. Such graduated inclusion forms a bridge between dependence and participation. Without a prolonged developmental phase, this gradual integration would not be possible. Environmental variability intensified the need for reliable transmission. Paleoclimatic data from African lake cores and marine sediments indicate repeated cycles of aridity and humidity during the Pleistocene. These cycles reshaped vegetation zones and animal distributions. Cultural memory allowed groups to adjust strategies across these shifts. If a drought reduced certain resources, knowledge of alternative foods or distant water sources became crucial. That knowledge existed within people, not in the landscape itself. Extended childhood ensures that such information is transmitted before elders die. Over time, cumulative culture compounds. A tool design refined across generations becomes more efficient. A migration route remembered across decades reduces uncertainty. The slow pace of childhood aligns with this compounding process. Each cohort of children inherits not only survival skills but the incremental improvements of those before them. The brain's prolonged plasticity provides the capacity. Overlapping generations provide the teachers. Energy sharing provides the fuel. Within the ecological and anatomical framework established earlier upright posture, constrained gestation, expanding brains, cooperative energy systems, cultural accumulation becomes the thread that binds them. Childhood stretches because learning stretches. The environment of origin demanded adaptation across time, and adaptation required preservation of experience. The long human childhood is therefore not merely biological delay. It is the temporal space in which cumulative culture is installed, refined, and carried forward into an uncertain world. Language adds another layer to the length of human childhood. While many animals communicate through calls, gestures, or scent, human language carries abstract meaning that extends beyond immediate signals. It allows reference to past events, distant places, and imagined futures. Such complexity is not present at birth. Infants respond to sound patterns early, yet vocabulary, grammar, and narrative structure emerge gradually over years. This slow acquisition reflects the brain's extended development discussed earlier. Neural circuits involved in speech perception, articulation, and symbolic reasoning mature across childhood. The prefrontal cortex, which supports planning and understanding of social rules, continues refining into adolescence. The anatomical compromise created by upright walking shifted birth earlier, leaving much neural organization to unfold after delivery. Language becomes one of the primary systems shaped during this prolonged period. The archaeological record does not preserve words, but it preserves behavior that implies structured communication. Coordinated hunting strategies, consistent tool standards across regions, and planned migration routes suggest shared symbolic frameworks. Such coordination is difficult to sustain without reliable transmission of complex information. A child growing within a Pleistocene band would hear repeated sounds attached to objects, actions, and roles. Over time, these sounds would form a network of associations, allowing instruction to move beyond demonstration alone. Demonstration teaches how, language teaches why and when. The combination increases flexibility. Environmental variability reinforces this need. Paleoclimatic data from African sediments reveal oscillations in rainfall and vegetation patterns. When habitats shift, instructions must adjust. Language allows rapid updating of strategies without waiting for slow genetic change. Yet mastery of language requires sustained exposure. Children do not absorb grammar instantly. They experiment with structure, make errors, and refine usage over years. This extended practice aligns with prolonged childhood. Language also deepens social bonds. It allows storytelling, which can encode collective memory of droughts, migrations, or successful hunts. Even if we cannot reconstruct specific narratives from early Homo, the persistence of cultural forms across long periods suggests stable communication channels. A child listening to repeated accounts of past events internalizes lessons indirectly. Such narrative learning depends on attention span and cognitive maturity that develop gradually. The upright body, which once constrained gestation and extended brain growth, also frees the hands for gesture. Gesture and speech likely evolve together, reinforcing symbolic capacity. Infants and young children rely heavily on pointing and shared gaze before full speech emerges. This transitional stage highlights how language builds upon extended neural plasticity. The demographic layering of early human groups ensures that children hear diverse voices and dialectal variations, strengthening communicative competence. Within fluctuating Pleistocene landscapes, language becomes a tool for navigating uncertainty. It enables coordination across distance and time. Yet because language is complex and abstract, it cannot be compressed into a brief developmental window. The long human childhood provides the interval necessary for mastering this symbolic system. In doing so, it ties together anatomy, brain development, culture, and environment into a single expanding network of meaning. Language does not develop in isolation from the body or from the landscape. It grows within daily interaction shaped by movement, shared tasks, and attention to the environment. In early human bands moving across African savannas and woodland mosaics, communication would have supported coordination over distance and time. A call might signal immediate danger, but structured language could specify direction, quantity, or intention. Such precision increases survival in variable habitats. Yet, precision requires practice. Children spend years refining pronunciation, expanding vocabulary, and mastering grammar. Errors are common in early speech. These mistakes are not signs of failure but evidence of gradual neural organization. The circuits that integrate sound, meaning, and social context mature slowly, particularly in the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. Research in developmental neuroscience shows that language acquisition depends on repeated exposure during sensitive periods. Synaptic connections strengthen when patterns are reinforced. Without sustained input, those connections weaken. In the Pleistocene environments where early humans lived, children would have heard language woven into daily routines, instructions about tool preparation, warnings about terrain, guidance during food processing, and narratives about past migrations. Such immersion cannot be compressed into a brief infancy. It requires a childhood long enough for repeated cycles of listening, imitation, and correction. The archaeological record indirectly reflects this complexity. Standardized tool types distributed across broad regions imply shared symbolic frameworks that go beyond mere imitation of gesture. The consistency of Acheulean hand axes across thousands of kilometers suggests that ideas traveled with people. Ideas require words or structured signs to move efficiently. When groups encountered new ecological challenges such as prolonged droughts recorded in lake sediment, cause language would have enabled rapid adjustment of collective strategies. Verbal communication reduces reliance on slow trial and error learning alone. Yet mastery of this system demands cognitive maturity that unfolds gradually. Language also structures social relationships. Through speech, individuals negotiate roles, express intentions, and resolve conflict. Conflict resolution in small bands is essential for cohesion. Young children must learn not only words but appropriate contexts for their use. Politeness norms, authority structures, and emotional regulation are embedded in linguistic practice. These layers deepen with age. Adolescents refine pragmatic understanding, grasping nuance and metaphor. This extended refinement mirrors the prolonged maturation of the prefrontal cortex. The upright body that once constrained gestation continues to shape communicative space. Walking upright allows face-to-face interaction and coordinated gesture. Gesture supports early language learning, bridging the gap between action and abstraction. Children point, imitate, and synchronize gaze long before constructing complex sentences. This gradual layering demonstrates why childhood cannot be brief if language is to function fully. Within fluctuating Pleistocene ecologies, language offered flexibility and foresight. It allowed planning of migrations before rains shifted, sharing of remembered water sources, and coordination of group movement. The complexity of this symbolic system demands time. Prolonged childhood provides that time, ensuring that language becomes stable enough to carry knowledge across generations and across changing landscapes. Language does more than transmit information. It reshapes how the mind organizes reality. When children learn words, they are not only labeling objects, they are dividing the world into categories, linking cause and effect, and distinguishing past from future. This symbolic structuring requires gradual neural refinement. Brain imaging in modern humans shows that regions involved in syntactic processing and abstract reasoning mature slowly, often extending into late adolescence. Such delayed maturation aligns with the long developmental arc already traced through anatomy and energy allocation. In early human societies, where survival depended on anticipating seasonal shifts and coordinating group decisions, the capacity to imagine future scenarios would have been essential. Language supports such anticipation by allowing individuals to discuss events not currently present. The archaeological record suggests increasing complexity in planning behavior over time. Sites associated with later Homo species reveal evidence of coordinated hunting, controlled fire use, and structured habitation patterns. These behaviors imply foresight and shared understanding. While stone and bone cannot preserve spoken words, the organization visible in these sites reflects communication beyond immediate gestures. For children growing in these communities, mastering language meant learning to participate in planning processes that extended beyond the present moment. That mastery required patience and repetition. Environmental variability intensifies this need. Paleoclimatic reconstructions show repeated shifts in rainfall and vegetation across Pleistocene Africa. When rivers dried or new resource zones emerged, groups had to relocate strategically. Language allowed discussion of remembered landscapes and distant water sources. Children listening to such exchanges gradually internalized spatial and temporal frameworks. Over years, they learned to connect stories of past scarcity with current decisions. This capacity to integrate memory with projections strengthens adaptive flexibility. Language also shapes moral and social norms. Through conversation, elders can explain expectations, reinforce cooperation, and correct behavior. Norms become internalized not through instinct alone, but through repeated verbal guidance. The slow maturation of impulse control, governed by the developing prefrontal cortex, creates a window during which linguistic instruction influences behavior. A long childhood ensures sufficient time for these norms to become stable parts of identity. The upright body continues to influence this process indirectly. Face-to-face interaction supports vocal exchange and shared attention. Group mobility across open landscapes creates moments of collective decision-making where language becomes central. Children observing these interactions gain experience in negotiation and persuasion. Such skills cannot be mastered quickly. They require layered exposure across years of participation. In this way, language binds together earlier threads: anatomical compromise, extended brain growth, cooperative energy systems, and cumulative culture. Each depends on communication capable of conveying nuance and memory. The time needed to internalize language contributes directly to the length of childhood. Without that extended interval, the symbolic system would remain fragile, unable to carry complex knowledge across generations or across shifting ecological conditions. Beyond tools and language, human childhood is shaped by the slow formation of emotional and social bonds. In many mammals, attachment to the mother ensures immediate survival, but social networks remain relatively simple. In humans, social life extends far beyond a single caregiver. Early human bands likely consisted of several families moving together across open landscapes, sharing food, shelter, and risk. Within such groups, children had to learn not only how to survive physically, but how to navigate relationships that could support or threaten their future stability. Emotional development unfolds gradually. Infants display early forms of attachment, yet understanding of fairness, reciprocity, and cooperation emerges over years. Studies of modern child development show that empathy and impulse control mature slowly, paralleling the prolonged development of the prefrontal cortex. In Pleistocene environments marked by fluctuating resources, cooperation was not optional. Hunting large game, gathering seasonal plants, and relocating camps required trust. Trust is built through repeated interaction and shared experience. A child growing within a small foraging band would observe how adults resolved disputes, shared meat, or allocated tasks. These observations become templates for later behavior. Archaeological evidence provides indirect support for structured social systems. The presence of coordinated hearths, communal butchery sites, and patterned burial practices in later Homo species suggests organized group behavior. Organized behavior implies shared norms. Shared norms require emotional regulation and mutual expectation. Emotional regulation is not fully formed at birth. It develops slowly as children test boundaries and receive feedback. Prolonged childhood allows these regulatory circuits to stabilize before individuals assume adult responsibilities. The upright body once constrained gestation, pushing much brain development into the social world. That world included complex hierarchies and alliances. Unlike many primates whose groups are structured primarily around dominance hierarchies, human social systems incorporate cooperation across unrelated individuals. This cooperation expands the circle of attachment. Children learn to read facial expressions, interpret tone, and anticipate reactions. Such sensitivity to social cues enhances group cohesion, but requires extended exposure. Environmental variability reinforces this need. Paleoclimatic shifts, altered migration routes and resource distribution. During scarcity, tension within groups could increase. Maintaining unity under stress demands emotional competence. Adolescents, who remain within the group for many years before forming independent households, refine these skills gradually. They participate in group tasks while still under guidance, allowing correction without severe consequences. Emotional development also influences teaching and learning. A child who trusts caregivers is more receptive to instruction. Secure attachment fosters curiosity and willingness to explore within safe boundaries. In fluctuating African ecosystems, exploration balanced with caution was essential. Children who ventured too far risked predation. Those who remained overly fearful might fail to learn necessary skills. Extended childhood provides time to calibrate this balance. Within the broader framework of anatomy, energy, brain growth, and language, emotional development forms another layer. Prolonged childhood is not solely about cognition or physical growth. It is about shaping individuals capable of sustaining complex social networks in unpredictable environments. The African landscapes where early humans evolved demanded cooperation across years, and childhood became the period during which that cooperation was slowly woven into character and habit. Social life in early human groups was not static. It shifted with movement across landscapes, with changes in resource abundance and with fluctuations in group size. In small bands navigating Pleistocene Africa, cooperation was essential, yet cooperation required constant maintenance. Emotional signals, facial expressions, tone of voice, posture guided everyday interaction. A child entering this environment faced more than physical challenges. It faced the task of learning how to interpret and respond to these signals accurately. Misreading intention could disrupt trust. Trust, once weakened, could threaten group cohesion during times of scarcity. Developmental psychology in modern humans shows that children gradually refine their ability to read emotional cues. Early sensitivity to faces evolves into more complex understanding of intention and fairness. This refinement parallels the prolonged maturation of neural networks in the frontal and temporal lobes. These networks integrate emotion with decision-making. In evolutionary terms, such integration would have been advantageous in variable environments where alliances and cooperation influenced access to resources. A child who learned to anticipate conflict and respond calmly could strengthen bonds rather than weaken them. Archaeological traces of communal activity hint at the social density of early human life. Repeated use of hearths, organized spatial arrangements within camps, and coordinated butchery sites imply that individuals worked in proximity. Proximity increases opportunity for both cooperation and tension. Emotional regulation becomes a stabilizing force. Prolonged childhood provides the interval necessary for that regulation to mature. Adolescents, still embedded within the group, practice negotiating status and responsibility under supervision. This gradual assumption of roles reduces abrupt transitions into adulthood. Environmental variability again intersects with social development. Paleoclimate records indicate cycles of drought and rainfall that altered resource distribution. During lean periods, stress within groups likely intensified. Sharing food equitably under scarcity requires restraint and empathy. Children observing such distribution learn not only technique but value systems. These values cannot be transmitted instantly. They require repeated demonstration across seasons and years. The upright body, once central to anatomical compromise, also shapes social orientation. Face-to-face interaction supports nuanced communication. Gestures and eye contact reinforce verbal cues. Children rely heavily on such multimodal signals as they learn social norms. Over time, these interactions become internalized patterns of response. Without extended exposure, the calibration of empathy and impulse control would remain incomplete. Prolonged childhood therefore functions as a training ground for social resilience. In unpredictable ecological contexts, physical strength alone does not secure survival. Stability depends on maintaining cooperative networks over long durations. The layered development of emotional competence, attachment, fairness, conflict resolution requires years of guided participation. Within early human bands, where generations overlapped and responsibilities were shared, children had the opportunity to observe, imitate, and gradually integrate into complex social systems. In this way, Extended childhood is intertwined with the demands of living in structured communities. It is the period during which individuals become capable of sustaining trust and cooperation across changing landscapes and shifting resource patterns. Emotional development does not end with learning to recognize expressions or share resources. It extends into the capacity to delay gratification, to tolerate uncertainty, and to align personal impulses with collective goals. In early human environments, these capacities would have carried significant weight. Groups moving across Pleistocene landscapes encountered unpredictable shifts in rainfall and vegetation. When food was scarce, immediate consumption of every available resource might threaten long-term survival. Sharing and planning required restraint. Restraint depends on neural systems that mature slowly, particularly in regions of the frontal cortex associated with impulse control and foresight. A long childhood provides the temporal space for these systems to stabilize before individuals assume full reproductive and economic roles. Archaeological evidence of structured campsites and repeated occupation layers suggests that early humans returned to known locations across seasons or years. Such return implies memory and collective agreement. Agreement requires negotiation, and negotiation requires emotional maturity. Children raised in these bands would witness decisions about when to move camp, how to distribute labor, or how to allocate food after a successful hunt. Over years of exposure, they internalized not only procedural knowledge but patterns of compromise. Adolescents, still embedded within the group, could test their status gradually rather than abruptly. This gradual testing reduces the risk of conflict escalation. The presence of overlapping generations amplifies this process. Elders provide models of patience and long-term thinking. Younger adults demonstrate strength and initiative. Children observe both. This layered observation builds a repertoire of social responses. Emotional competence becomes cumulative, refined across multiple relationships rather than a single attachment bond. In fluctuating ecological contexts, where stress might intensify during drought cycles documented in sediment records, such competence stabilizes group cohesion. The upright posture that once constrained gestation continues to shape interaction. Standing face to face enhances subtle communication through micro-expressions and gestures. Shared attention around hearths or tool-making areas creates repeated opportunities for social learning. Emotional cues exchanged in these settings become part of the child's internal map of behavior. Without extended exposure, this map would remain incomplete. Long childhood thus functions as an interval for calibrating personal ambition against collective survival. Impulses to compete or dominate must be balanced with cooperation and empathy. This calibration cannot be rushed. Neural maturation, environmental experience, and cultural expectation intersect across years. The ecological pressures of early human life did not reward isolated strength. They favored groups that could coordinate over extended periods. Emotional resilience and social intelligence supported that coordination. Within the broader framework already traced anatomical compromise, prolonged brain growth, energy sharing, cumulative culture, and language emotional development completes another layer of the system. Childhood stretches because integrating self into society requires time. In landscapes marked by unpredictability, stability emerges from relationships. Prolonged childhood provides the slow apprenticeship through which those relationships are formed, tested, and sustained. Archaeological evidence offers another perspective on the length of human childhood. Bones, teeth, and settlement traces do not speak directly, yet they preserve patterns that reveal growth and participation across age groups. One of the clearest sources of information comes from teeth. Dental development follows a relatively regular schedule, and fossilized teeth from early Homo individuals allow researchers to estimate age at death. Compared to apes, humans show slower eruption of permanent teeth and a delayed onset of adulthood. This extended dental timeline suggests that prolonged childhood was not a recent cultural invention but a deep-rooted biological pattern. Even in earlier members of the genus Homo, developmental pacing appears slower than in Australopithecines. Beyond teeth, skeletal remains reveal stages of growth that stretch across years. The fusion of certain bones, such as those in the wrist or pelvis, occurs gradually. Juvenile skeletons found at habitation sites indicate that children were present within camps rather than separated from adult activity. The placement of young remains alongside tools and hearths suggests integration into daily life. While we cannot reconstruct specific tasks assigned to children, the context implies proximity to adult labor and social interaction. Spatial patterns within archaeological sites further illuminate childhood's role. At some Paleolithic sites, clusters of small footprints preserved in ancient sediments suggest the movement of children alongside adults. These traces, rare yet significant, show that young individuals were not hidden away. They moved through the same landscapes, albeit likely under supervision. Such integration implies that learning occurred within shared space rather than isolated instruction. Environmental context deepens this interpretation. During the Pleistocene, shifting rainfall patterns altered vegetation and animal distribution. Campsites often appear near water sources or resource-rich zones, reflecting strategic placement. Children growing in these settings would observe adults responding to environmental cues, changes in animal tracks, plant availability, or weather signs. Archaeological continuity and site reuse suggests that knowledge of favorable locations was transmitted across generations. Extended childhood provides the time needed to internalize such spatial memory. Tool assemblages sometimes include smaller or less refined artifacts that may represent practice pieces. While it is difficult to attribute these definitively to juveniles, experimental archaeology indicates that novices produce flakes and cores with distinctive characteristics. If children practice tool-making within camps, their learning would leave subtle material traces. This possibility aligns with the broader pattern of gradual skill acquisition discussed earlier. The upright body that once shaped birth constraints also shaped how individuals occupied space. Camps arranged around hearths create focal points for observation and instruction. Children within these circles could watch, imitate, and gradually participate. The archaeological record, though incomplete, repeatedly shows evidence of shared spaces rather than strict separation by age. Through bones, teeth, footprints, and tool debris, archaeology provides indirect confirmation that childhood was both prolonged and embedded within communal life. These material traces connect biological development to lived experience across shifting Pleistocene landscapes. Material traces of childhood do not only reveal age at death, they also hint at patterns of gradual participation. In several Paleolithic sites, archaeologists have identified clusters of lithic debris that differ slightly in size and precision from surrounding tools. While it is impossible to assign these pieces to specific individuals, experimental replication studies show that beginners tend to produce flakes with inconsistent angles and irregular edges. If such novice patterns appear within habitation zones, it suggests that learning occurred in shared spaces rather than in isolation. The presence of less refined artifacts alongside masterfully shaped implements implies a spectrum of skill within the same camp. That spectrum mirrors the demographic layering already discussed. Children and adolescents likely practiced under supervision, gradually moving from observation to contribution. Skeletal analysis provides additional insight. Growth markers in long bones and enamel hyperplasia lines in teeth record episodes of physiological stress. These markers reveal that childhood in Pleistocene environments was not free of hardship. Periods of drought or food scarcity left measurable traces on developing bodies. Yet the survival of some individuals through such stress indicates that groups were capable of buffering hardship sufficiently to allow continued growth. The ability to sustain children through nutritional fluctuation aligns with cooperative provisioning and shared energy systems. Archaeological evidence of repeated site occupation during variable climatic phases suggests that communities developed strategies to mitigate environmental risk. Burial practices in later Paleolithic contexts offer another indirect window. The intentional placement of juvenile remains, sometimes accompanied by grave goods, indicates recognition of children as valued members of the group. While interpretation must remain cautious, such practices suggest emotional and social investment extending beyond mere biological necessity. Valuation of children reinforces the idea that prolonged development was not incidental but integral to group continuity. Environmental reconstruction deepens this picture. Sediment cores from African lakes and isotopic data from faunal remains reveal cycles of aridity and humidity that would have reshaped resource availability. In such shifting conditions, children growing within campsites near stable water sources or migratory corridors would witness adaptive strategies firsthand. The repetition of occupation layers across climatic phases indicates that knowledge persisted even as landscapes changed. Extended childhood provides the time necessary to absorb and internalize this adaptive memory. Footprint evidence, though rare, illustrates movement patterns that include individuals of varying sizes traveling together. Such traces suggest that children were integrated into daily mobility rather than secluded. Integration exposes them to the rhythms of migration and resource tracking. The upright body, once central to childbirth compromise, facilitated shared movement across terrain. Even if young children could not travel long distances unaided, their presence influenced pacing and camp placement. Through these material indicators, practice tools, stress markers, burial contexts, and footprints, the archaeological record supports the conclusion that prolonged childhood was embedded in communal life. Growth unfolded within shared spaces shaped by ecological variability, reinforcing the connection between biological development and adaptive survival strategies. When archaeological traces are viewed together rather than separately, they outline a consistent pattern. Dental growth timelines indicate delayed maturation. Juvenile skeletal remains appear within habitation zones. Lithic assemblages sometimes reveal gradients of skill. Occasional footprints preserve the presence of smaller bodies moving alongside adults. Each piece alone is incomplete, yet combined they portray childhood as an extended and integrated phase of life, rather than a brief transition. This integration occurred within landscapes that were neither stable nor forgiving. Paleoclimatic data from sediment cores and isotope analysis of fauna show cycles of drought, expansion of grasslands, and contraction of forests. Human groups occupied these shifting mosaics repeatedly over tens of thousands of years. The continuity of occupation suggests adaptive flexibility, transmitted across generations. The distribution of sites near reliable water sources and raw material outcrops implies strategic placement informed by memory. Such placement would have been learned gradually. A child growing within these camps absorbed patterns of movement and settlement that reflected accumulated experience. The upright body, enabling endurance walking, allowed adults to scout distant zones while maintaining group cohesion. Children observing these patterns over years internalized spatial knowledge that extended beyond immediate surroundings. Spatial memory is not encoded genetically in detail. It develops through exposure and repetition. Burial contexts, though more common in later Paleolithic phases, further suggest recognition of life stages. The inclusion of children in intentional burials indicates that they were socially acknowledged. Social acknowledgement reinforces the value placed on extended development. If childhood had been merely a vulnerable waiting period before productivity, its material recognition would likely have been minimal. Instead, the archaeological record hints at emotional and symbolic dimensions intertwined with biological growth. Patterns of site reuse across climatic oscillations demonstrate that groups return to known territories despite environmental change. This recurrence implies transmission of knowledge not only about resources but about routes and seasonal timing. Children present in these recurring camps would learn by witnessing adaptation in action. When rainfall shifted, elders might guide the band toward remembered refugia. Such guidance would require years of accumulated observation by younger members before they could assume similar roles. The archaeological perspective thus aligns with earlier threads: anatomical compromise, prolonged brain development, cooperative energy systems, cumulative culture, language, and emotional regulation. Material evidence anchors these abstract processes in physical traces. Childhood was not hidden from daily life. It was woven into the spatial and temporal fabric of human communities. Growth occurred within camps shaped by firelight, tool-making, and shared meals. The persistence of these patterns across fluctuating Pleistocene environments indicates that extended childhood was compatible with survival, not despite ecological variability, but within it. Through stone, bone, and sediment, the record affirms that long human development was embedded in lived landscapes that demanded learning across years. When childhood extends across more than a decade, it reshapes the structure of the entire population. In many mammals, rapid maturation produces a demographic pattern in which juveniles quickly become reproductive adults. Generations overlap briefly, and population growth responds quickly to environmental change. In humans, delayed maturation creates a different rhythm. Children remain dependent for many years before contributing fully to subsistence or reproduction. This delay influences birth spacing, group size, and long-term stability. Anthropological and demographic modeling suggest that prolonged childhood often correlates with longer intervals between births. A mother caring for a dependent child who requires sustained energy investment may delay subsequent reproduction. Such spacing reduces immediate population growth but increases the survival probability of each child. In fluctuating Pleistocene environments, where rainfall cycles altered resource availability, this trade-off may have enhanced resilience. Fewer simultaneous dependents per caregiver reduce vulnerability during scarcity. Fossil assemblages from later Homo populations reveal varied age distributions within sites. The presence of juveniles, adolescents, and older adults suggests layered generational overlap rather than rapid turnover. Layered overlap allows knowledge transmission and stabilizes social networks. Adolescents, still learning yet increasingly capable, form a transitional group between dependent children and fully productive adults. This prolonged transition reflects a life history strategy distinct from many other primates. Environmental variability again plays a central role. Paleoclimatic records from African and Eurasian sediments show alternating phases of abundance and stress. A population structured around slow maturation and cooperative care may adjust more gradually to these shifts. Rapid reproduction in unstable environments can lead to resource depletion and increased mortality. Slower growth, combined with shared provisioning, spreads risk across time. The upright body that once constrained gestation and extended childhood indirectly shapes demographic tempo by imposing energetic and developmental costs that encourage spacing. Delayed maturity also affects social organization. Individuals remain within natal groups longer before forming new families. Extended residence fosters familiarity with group norms and strengthens alliances. This cohesion becomes especially important during environmental stress, when collective action determines survival. Adolescents gradually assume roles in hunting, gathering, or tool production under supervision, reducing abrupt transitions that might destabilize group dynamics. The archaeological record of recurring habitation sites supports this interpretation. Repeated occupation suggests that groups maintained continuity across generations. Continuity requires demographic stability. A life history pattern characterized by extended childhood, delayed reproduction, and overlapping generations fosters such stability. Thus, prolonged childhood is not only a biological phenomenon, it is a demographic strategy embedded in ecological context. By slowing the pace of maturation and reproduction, early human populations created a rhythm of growth that matched the variability of their landscapes. The structure of the population became another layer supporting extended development, reinforcing the interplay between anatomy, brain growth, culture, and environment. When maturation is delayed, the entire tempo of life shifts. A population composed of many dependent children and adolescents requires different patterns of cooperation than one dominated by rapidly reproducing adults. In early human bands, prolonged childhood meant that a significant portion of the group consisted of individuals not yet fully productive. This demographic weight could appear fragile in harsh environments, yet it also created long learning corridors. Adolescents remained within the group for years before forming independent households. During this interval, they absorbed complex subsistence strategies and social expectations while gradually contributing to collective labor. Birth spacing plays a central role in this rhythm. Ethnographic studies of recent foraging societies suggest that nursing duration and energetic demands often extend the interval between births. While direct parallels to the deep past must be drawn carefully, the principle of energetic limitation applies broadly. A mother investing heavily in one child's brain growth and protection may delay subsequent reproduction. In fluctuating Pleistocene climates, such spacing reduces simultaneous dependency loads. Fewer very young children at once may increase the probability that each survives periods of scarcity. This strategy slows population growth but stabilizes it. Archaeological evidence of repeated site occupation supports the idea of continuity rather than explosive demographic expansion. Campsites reused across climatic oscillations imply that groups maintained cohesion over long durations. Cohesion depends on balanced age distribution. If too many members are very young or very old simultaneously, subsistence capacity may strain. Prolonged childhood spreads developmental stages across time, creating overlapping cohorts of children, adolescents, and adults. This layering distributes labor and learning across age classes. Environmental variability intersects again with demographic structure. Sediment records from African lake basins reveal alternating phases of drought and rainfall that reshaped resource landscapes. In such contexts, populations with rapid reproduction might outpace available resources during favorable years and suffer severe decline during downturns. Slower reproduction aligned with extended childhood may buffer these oscillations. Cooperative provisioning further stabilizes intake during lean seasons. The upright body that once constrained gestation indirectly reinforces this tempo. Early birth leads to extended dependency. Extended dependency encourages spacing. Spacing shapes population structure. This chain of cause and effect integrates anatomy with demography. Adolescents, neither fully dependent nor fully independent, serve as a bridge. They assist with childcare, gathering, or simple hunting tasks while continuing to learn. Their prolonged residence within natal groups strengthens intergenerational bonds and preserves cultural memory. In this way, prolonged childhood becomes embedded in the demographic fabric of early human life. It influences not only individual growth, but collective rhythm. The structure of the population adapts to ecological uncertainty by slowing and layering development, reinforcing stability across fluctuating landscapes. Over long stretches of time, the demographic consequences of extended childhood accumulate. A population in which individuals take many years to reach maturity develops a slower generational turnover. This slower turnover alters how cultural change unfolds. When generations overlap widely, elders and adolescents coexist for extended periods. Knowledge is not replaced abruptly, but layered gradually. Archaeological sequences showing continuity in tool traditions across thousands of years suggest that cultural transitions were often incremental rather than sudden. A slow demographic rhythm supports such gradual modification. Children raised within this structure have time to observe both established practices and subtle innovations introduced by younger adults. Delayed reproduction also influences population density. In fluctuating Pleistocene environments, where rainfall cycles alternated between expansion and contraction of habitable zones, slower growth may have reduced pressure on limited resources. Sediment cores from African lakes and isotope analyses of faunal remains indicate repeated ecological oscillations. A population expanding too rapidly during favorable phases could face sharp decline when drought returned. Extended childhood, combined with birth spacing, moderates this expansion. It spreads reproductive output across years rather than concentrating it. The upright body that once constrained gestation and encouraged earlier birth thus shapes demographic tempo across generations. Early birth increases dependency. Dependency extends care. Extended care encourages spacing. Spacing stabilizes growth. This chain connects anatomy to long-term population structure. Adolescents, occupying a prolonged transitional stage, further reinforce stability. They contribute partially to subsistence while still absorbing instruction. Their presence reduces abrupt shifts in labor capacity when older members die. Archaeological evidence of habitation layers often reveals mixed-age assemblages, suggesting sustained occupation rather than rapid replacement. Such layering aligns with a demographic model of slow maturation and overlapping cohorts. Burial patterns in later Paleolithic contexts also indicate recognition of age diversity within communities. While interpretations remain cautious, these patterns suggest structured social groups where life stages were acknowledged. Environmental unpredictability again provides context. During extended drought phases, Smaller and more stable groups may have been better positioned to endure. Cooperative networks reinforced by long-standing social bonds increase resilience. Prolonged childhood fosters these bonds by keeping individuals within natal groups for extended periods. Emotional development, discussed earlier, matures within this demographic frame. Over evolutionary time, the combination of anatomical compromise, extended brain growth, cultural accumulation, language, emotional regulation, and demographic layering converges into a unified life history strategy. Childhood length is not an isolated anomaly. It is woven into population rhythm and ecological adaptation. By stretching maturation across years and spacing generations, early humans align their demographic tempo with the variability of their landscapes. The result is a species whose survival strategy depends less on rapid reproduction and more on sustained cooperation across time. When all these layers are viewed together, the length of human childhood no longer appears as a simple delay. It becomes the visible surface of a deeper evolutionary pattern shaped by trade-offs. Upright walking narrowed the birth canal and shifted development outward into the social world. Enlarged brains required prolonged growth and sustained energy. Fluctuating Pleistocene climates demanded flexibility rather than rigid instinct. Cooperative food sharing buffered energetic cost. Overlapping generations stabilized knowledge transmission. Language and emotional regulation deepened social cohesion. Demographic spacing aligned population growth with environmental variability. Each element reinforces the others. In evolutionary biology, trade-offs are unavoidable. A trait that confers advantage in one domain often imposes cost in another. Early birth reduced gestation constraints but increased vulnerability. Larger brains expanded cognitive capacity but demanded greater caloric input. Slower maturation delayed reproduction but strengthened cultural continuity. Extended childhood is the cumulative expression of these intertwined trade-offs. It represents not inefficiency but redistribution of time and energy across the lifespan. The archaeological record anchors this interpretation in material evidence. Recurrent habitation sites, consistent tool traditions, and signs of communal activity across climatic oscillations suggest that prolonged development was sustainable. The presence of juveniles and elders within the same contexts indicates demographic layering compatible with long dependency. These patterns emerge not in stable environments but in landscapes marked by oscillation between wet and dry phases, forest and grassland. Adaptation required memory, cooperation, and foresight. Those capacities depend on time. The upright body that once constrained gestation continues to frame this narrative. By freeing the hands, it made tools central to survival. Tool dependence expanded cultural complexity. Cultural complexity demanded learning. Learning required extended neural plasticity. Neural plasticity prolonged childhood. This chain reveals continuity rather than contradiction. The apparent weakness of human infancy becomes the starting point of a system that amplifies adaptability. Extended childhood also reframes strength. In many species, strength is measured by early independence. In humans, strength is measured by the ability to sustain prolonged vulnerability within supportive networks. Emotional bonds, shared provisioning, and symbolic communication transform dependence into preparation. Preparation extends across years because the environment demands competence beyond reflex. Seen from this perspective, the long human childhood is neither accident nor luxury. It is a structural adaptation embedded in anatomy, ecology, and social organization. It reflects a life history strategy in which investment in learning and cooperation yields resilience across unpredictable landscapes. The question that remains is not why childhood is long in isolation, but how the future of our species continues to be shaped by this ancient decision to grow slowly. If extended childhood is the outcome of layered trade-offs, then it also becomes the foundation upon which later human societies were built. The slow tempo of development created individuals whose capacities were shaped not only by immediate survival needs, but by accumulated memory and shared expectation. As Homo sapiens spread beyond Africa into Eurasia and eventually across continents, this prolonged learning interval accompanied them. The environments changed: glacial climates in Europe, arid plains in Central Asia, coastal zones rich in marine resources, but the developmental pattern persisted. Fossil evidence of juvenile remains in Upper Paleolithic sites across diverse regions suggests that extended childhood was carried intact through migration. The ability to adapt to new ecological zones depended on flexible cognition and cooperative networks. These capacities had been cultivated over years of childhood. In earlier African contexts, when groups entered unfamiliar territories with different fauna and seasonal cycles, learning did not begin from zero. It extended prior experience through modification. Language allowed rapid sharing of observations. Emotional bonds maintained cohesion during uncertainty. Demographic spacing reduced strain during resource transitions. Each of these features traces back to the prolonged developmental phase already embedded in anatomy and life history. As material culture diversified, seen in varied tool industries, ornamentation, and symbolic artifacts, the need for structured learning likely intensified. Carved objects, tailored clothing, and complex hunting implements require instruction beyond simple imitation. The presence of such artifacts in archaeological layers implies that children spent years absorbing techniques and meanings. Even without direct records of instruction, the continuity and refinement of craft across generations indicates stable transmission channels sustained by extended youth. Environmental unpredictability did not disappear outside Africa. Glacial cycles in Eurasia introduced long periods of cold and resource redistribution. Adaptation to these conditions required foresight and cooperation. A species characterized by rapid maturation might struggle to reorganize social systems under such stress. The human strategy of prolonged learning and overlapping generations offered continuity. Adolescents, still integrated within their natal groups, could participate in innovation while guided by elders. This bridging function between youth and adulthood stabilized adaptation. The upright body that once constrained gestation remained constant, as did the extended postnatal brain growth it necessitated. The energetic burden continued to be managed through cooperation and, later, through increasingly sophisticated subsistence strategies. Over time, this developmental framework supported the emergence of agriculture, urbanization, and complex social hierarchies. Even as environments and technologies transformed, the long childhood remained. Thus, the ancient decision, encoded in anatomy to grow slowly outside the womb, continued to shape human destiny far beyond the Pleistocene. Extended childhood became the quiet architecture beneath cultural expansion. It sustained flexibility during migration, buffered demographic stress, and preserved accumulated knowledge across shifting landscapes. In this sense, the length of childhood is not only a relic of evolutionary compromise, but an enduring structure guiding human adaptation across time and space. In the end, the length of human childhood reveals something quiet but profound about our species. It shows that survival, for humans, was never built on speed alone. It was built on time. Time to grow outside the womb because the body could not carry further. Time to wire a brain capable of abstraction and foresight. Time to absorb language, refine tools, and internalize norms that hold groups together under stress. Time to balance impulse with restraint in landscapes that shifted between abundance and scarcity. The African environments in which early Homo evolved were not gentle. Sediment cores record cycles of aridity and rainfall that altered vegetation and animal migration patterns repeatedly across millennia. In such instability, immediate independence might appear advantageous. Yet humans did not follow that path. Instead, anatomy and ecology converged to create a species that matures slowly. The upright pelvis required earlier birth. Earlier birth extended dependency. Extended dependency required cooperative energy systems. Cooperative systems fostered overlapping generations. Overlapping generations stabilized knowledge. Knowledge allowed adaptation to environmental fluctuation. Across these linked steps, childhood lengthened not by accident, but by structural necessity. Archaeological traces, stone tools refined across thousands of years, hearths reused across climatic oscillations, footprints of varied sizes preserved in ancient sediments anchor this narrative in material reality. These traces show that children were present within communal spaces shaped by firelight and shared labor. Growth unfolded within camps positioned near water and raw material sources, in landscapes where drought and abundance alternated. The slow arc of development matched the slow pulse of ecological change. Extended childhood also reframes the meaning of weakness. A newborn human cannot stand or feed itself, yet that vulnerability is the opening of a long apprenticeship. Within supportive networks, vulnerability becomes preparation. Emotional bonds, language, and cultural practice gradually transform dependence into competence. The strength of the species lies not in rapid maturation, but in sustained investment across years. This ancient developmental design continues to shape modern societies. Education systems, intergenerational households, and prolonged adolescence all reflect the deep evolutionary pattern established in Pleistocene contexts. Even as technology alters daily life, the biological rhythm remains. Brain maturation still extends into early adulthood. Emotional regulation and social identity still refine over time. The trade-offs embedded in our anatomy continue to echo. To see human childhood as inefficiency is to miss its adaptive depth. It is a strategy carved into bone, brain, and social structure. It binds anatomy to environment and memory to future possibility. We grow slowly because our species depends on what can only be learned gradually. The landscapes have changed, yet the tempo persists. And so the question lingers: if we were shaped to grow through long years of guided learning, how might we honor that slow design in the world we now inhabit?